So welcome, our beloved visionary leader and humble, remarkable servant leader, Indy Johar. My beloved brother,
Oh,
so
yeah.
appreciate you as always. And at Setsi, as always, we begin all things by acknowledging our creator, by acknowledging the various stewards of the lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, Indy, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable work?
Oh, I don't know. Look, I'm honored to be here, and it's such a power to be in your presence, and an honor to be in your presence, actually, and how you hold space for many of us, and how you create the fertile ground for many of us. So I just want to firstly acknowledge by that, and I love the authenticity and the passion with which you hold space. So, hey, my name's Indy Johar. Was part of building Dark Matter Labs, and I suppose I think what I'm as part of building many other things, I suppose my thing has been how do you build things? How do you philosophize and build things together? And I think that's just been my life journey, is that too often we privilege a culture of just do it without the actual adequacy of just thinking about it. And how do you bring these two worlds back together again, rather than thinking that the thinking is irrelevant and the doing is everything, or the thinking is everything and the doing is nothing. And the one thing I've been reflecting on, and maybe it's something we can pull out, is that, there's this whole discourse among startups that thinking ideas are cheap. And I'm like, I looked at myself and thought, really? No, I don't get these random ideas that just pop into my head. Ideas are like a function of hard work. They're a function of having worked on many problems for many years and realizing the way you were working in the problem wasn't the right way. And there was a lateral way to do it. It required years of toil to understand that this problem or the idea space was different. And I've kind of often felt myself frustrated when people say ideas are cheap. And I was like, it's not been my experience. I've paid years to figure out a good idea and why it's good. So I don't know. I live in this world of recognizing. I loved your thing about we stand on the toil of many. And I think to work with that respect, I think is beautiful.
That's beautiful. And I agree with you completely. There is that stance that it's all about the execution and ideas are, a dime a dozen, when no, ideas are based off the lived experience or social location. Ideas come from, yeah. So that's brilliant. Thank you once again, as always, for your leadership. So my next question, what's inspiring you right now? What has you curious, or what's keeping you up at nights?
Okay. What's inspiring me? What's inspiring me is, and what's keeping me up at night are probably the same things. What's keeping me up at night is I think we are about to. I think we're genuinely moving into a mass multipolar world, and I don't. People often talk about U.S. China. I don't think it's just US China. It's US China, yes, at a macro level. Within US, you've got multiple fragments of polarization. Within Canada, we've got what 600 odd nations. Like it's the pluralization that we're seeing. And in one hand, that's scary. And the other hand, actually, that's sort of a new emergence of a new type of, I think, a new type of maturity happening in the world as we move from a single point means of organizing to actually sort of a new distributed capacity. So the same thing that we're seeing is probably a threat. And also what that means is that the pathways of transition are going to be different, and they're going to be different in every location. And that requires actually like what we're going to value is not universality of something, but the situationality of something. And that's a different type of valuing. So, and in order to move into a situational value, then you have to value the agency and the sovereignty that is situationally rooted, an embodied theory of innovation rather than an abstracted theory of innovation. So it isn't about Elon Musk's, AI, which is universal, but it's the situational intelligence, the embodied intelligence that actually brings it together into relationship with the multiple forms of value. So I think that's so there's a sort of world shift going on, which I think, and this situational intelligence is sitting networked. It's not like situational and isolated. It's not siloed. It's like you and I. we are networked as well as situational. It's the act to be able to be in relationship at a planetary scale, but also to be able to be situationally embodied and relationship in a proximal scale, and being able to operate across those things, I think is something beautiful that's happening. I think what I'm also excited by as a result of that is that our worldview is shifting at a much deeper level, which is that in a way, universalism allowed for the centralization of control, the centralization of value. For banks in the UK produce most of the money in the UK, which means that the monetary production mechanism centralizes the theory of what is value. And the colonizing power of capital and how we orchestrate capital as a tool of colonization means it's asymmetric in defining theories of value in society. Now, that worldview worked when you sort of made a sort of linear extrapolated theory of value, which is universal and singular. But in a situational worldview, value cannot be discovered that way. And I think that's also inviting us to radically transform. You can't, I think theories of property, theories of labor are becoming, property is only possible when you can draw a boundary around something and asymmetrically hold it in a theory of distance and power, right? And the ability to do that distancing, the disentanglement, so not embodied relationship, but disentangled relationship, asymmetric relationship where you have the rights of something as opposed to the embodied relationships of something. I think that worldview is all crumbling slowly. And the theory of labor, which I think is equally as problematic, because I think the theory of labor is also about the instructability of one human to another or one system to another. So instructing somebody means that the instructor has to have a comprehension of the problem space, which is not possible, has to have a universal idea. So I think our theories of labor, our theories of property, all these things are crumbling around us as we start to become a mass multipolar system of agents in relationship. And I think that is both profoundly exciting, because I think in there is a life-affirming economy, an economy which expands the theory of affirmation of life, to use Ruth Gilmore's work and other people like that, and to sort of how that life-affirming and the expansion of our theory of life to include human, non-human, as well as maybe even machine systems as a theory of life. And that is not about control, it's not about punishment as a means of organizing, but fundamentally about actually ennoblement of the thesis of life as a learning capacity and a relational capacity, which recognizes that. So I think we're at the cusp of the most structurally beautiful transition, which changes everything around us. And in that moment of that cusp of that transition, we're feeling the turbulence of power. We're feeling the turbulence of the loss of control. We're feeling the turbulence of theories of fear creeping into the system as we don't know how to grow to be big enough, to be able to be human enough to be able to deal with that. We do not know how to live in care because we've lived in authority and instructability. We have to build new muscles. So I think we live in a moment of fear as we go from one situation to another.
I couldn't agree more. My goodness, thank you so much for all that context and wisdom. When I think about the promise and perils of all this, and you use the term life-affirming economies, what do you think that looks like in the context of where we are right now? Like right now, we have depolarization. We have young people that are deeply connected to technology. My son recently put me onto a series called Pantheon. It's about uploaded intelligence. It's like Neuralink. So there's all this happening right now, and this poly crisis. Like, what does a life-affirming economic system look like?
Well, I think there's a two-way pathway to understanding it. One is to recognize that our current economic model doesn't affirm life. It affirms theories of control, objecthood, assets, and resources. That is what it affirms. And in the process of affirming that, it turns the world in a tree is not as valuable as a piece of timber, right? So it's system. I mean, this is just a way to communicate that we do not understand the value of soil, we just understand the value of timber. And so everything is perceived through its utilitarian dead value, as opposed to its value in affirmation. And this also means that our economy of labor actually is only constructed on the idea of perceivable instructionable roles and accountability, rather than actually the embodiment of embodied intelligences, embodied care. We don't have that. So I think what we have to realize is how systemically we have constructed management theory. Most management theory is the extension of militaries. It's an extension of security systems. It's not an extension of a life-affirming means of organizing. It's effectively a means of instructability control. So we built this worldview, and we've also mirrored this worldview in our theory of property in terms of how we own things, how we construct the world around us. So I think the big crisis we face is that means of organizing, that method of organizing the world is now self-terminating us, because every timber, every forest is merely valuable as wood, or actually everyone is instrumentalized in their object value and doesn't care about the micro externalities and the violences they construct. But those micro externalities, whether it micro violences, accumulate to self-terminating us. So I think this is a crisis of that systemic worldview. And it challenges everything. I think, theories of capital allocation, theories of management, theories of organizing, theories of property, theories of labor. And the problem isn't capitalism versus socialism, which is often when these debates all go, well, if you're not a fan of capitalism, you must be a socialist, right? And it was like, well, actually, I would argue that the only difference between capitalism and socialism is who does the control. Socialism tries to democratize the theory of control or distribute the theory of control. Capitalism says the best way to doing this is to reduce control in the hands of the few and empower the individuals to do control. But the dominant thesis underneath them is still labor, property, capital, right? It's still the same theory of control. And so I think the paradigm shift is not capitalism versus communism. The paradigm shift is actually breaking the theory of control. What does that world look like? I think, and I think this is, sometimes I think we are ready to describe what it isn't, what it needs to be an absolute opposite of that. So imagine a world where we expanded our theory of life to include, imagine the census of Canada was no longer just about humans, but actually humans and other keystone species, and also actually included machine systems even, right? So in a few years. So we started to expand our thesis of how do we cohabit this beautiful land in a completely different way. So expanded our accountability structures broadly. Imagine a worldview where capital wasn't structured on theories of debt and asymmetric power, but financial capital recognized it operated in relationships of multiple other forms of capital. It was a partnering infrastructure. It recognized care, gift, historic knowledge, embodied knowledge, all these other things, or other forms of capital, were actually key to unlocking and preserving and enhancing financial capital. So it operated genuinely, and it operated in a theory of flourishing, which is that it was not there to optimize financial capital returns. It was to optimize the flourishing of all those capital returns, and in return, optimize the flourishing of financial capital as well. So it operationalized itself. It operationalized itself to be dynamically restructuring. So it wasn't asymmetric in its priorities of extraction, but actually recognized it to be in relationship with. I think those, when we talk about decolonizing capital, those pathways exist. And I think what gives me deep hope is our bureaucratic structures, which were designed around centralized theories of control, can now start to be reimagined in a new computational age, to be in a different format, to be operationalizing new theories of multiple capitals, to be dynamic, to be equitable, to be constructed as a theory of agents. And I think the re-agentification of the world, and I think it also shifts political language, like how do we move beyond not the freedom of choice, which is often how freedom is constructed. What is the freedom of how do I give you the freedom of choice? But I think the much deeper freedom that we should be talking about is how to be radically, how do we construct the freedom to be radically human? And by radically, I'm talking about the root radical, to be deeply human. And what would that freedom look like? And how do you construct a world for that freedom? And I think every one of these things are now in challenge, and they require not just a technical. This is why I think, yes, we can talk about, whether it's tree canopies of cities or electrification of cities. This is the work that we're doing, but or new forms of capital instruments. But actually, so not only new asset class, the collective intelligence of a city. These are new forms of theories of assets and value, but actually rooted behind them is a fundamentally different worldview. And these things need to be co-joined and recognized as a systemic transformation. So this is not just, oh, wouldn't it be lovely? I think this is the only way to actually build the transformative assets, and I don't even want to use the word transformative, agents of the 21st century, and multitudes of agents of the 21st century, and recognize we're operating in a different way. And it starts to also deeply reconcile historic injustices of power, asymmetry, and the violence we've constructed, certainly in the Canadian context, between our multiple cohabitants and relationships with the land. And so it starts to reconcile the Crown perspective and the Indigenous perspective into a new multi-eyed way of seeing, which I think is genuinely necessary, not only necessary in the Canadian context, but necessary at the planetary context. And I think that's an extraordinary moment.
That's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for that. All your deep introspection, your authenticity, your candor, and brilliance. I appreciate you as always. My next question, what challenges and barriers do you face in your work? And what are some of the approaches you and your colleagues are taking to overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, it's really, I think the biggest challenges I think we're facing right now is there's a systemic challenge right now. So the biggest thing I'm trying to communicate to everyone right now is, if you are a wealth holder, let's talk to wealth holders, in financial wealth holder, your financial wealth is fundamentally integrated to the development of the planet and the preservation of the planet. There is no wealth without the planet. This is it's a non-divisible reality. We've created the illusion of divisible wealth. It's a kind of convenient mental illusion, but really it's not real. Wealth is foundationally an entangled asset. It's fundamentally entangled to our shared futures. And I think it's really important for wealth holders to recognize that wealth is an attribution of power, restored power, and with great power comes great responsibility. Asymmetry of power by itself is violence. It is with the great responsibility of recognizing your entanglements that you have to operationalize. And the risks that we face are shared, non-divisible risks. They cannot be divided to people. And this is, I think, one of the biggest, that people yes, there will be greater violence for some people at the outset. I'm pretty unfortunately convinced about that right now. But there is no pathway once you go down that line for a few to survive and the many not. And this is, I think, really important for us to conceptually destroy as an idea. Too often I sit in conversations and people say, the carrying capacity of the planet is 1 billion people, so we're going to lose probably 4 or 5 billion people. That's just unfortunately where we are. I'm like, well, I find it very difficult, those conversations, genuinely. That's why I don't like having population conversations, because they just don't understand the violence of what they're really talking about. They're abstracted, dehumanized theories. When you say lose 7 billion people, we're talking about the greatest loss of computational, beautiful life, of creative capacity, options into the future of humanity. How many Einsteins will we have lost? How many Mozarts will we have lost? How many musicians will we have lost? Like, I don't think we actually understand what we're talking about here. How many everyday kisses, everyday smiles, everyday poems? What will we have lost, right? So I find it sort of deep. However, what I have to remind them is that unfortunately we face a world where the level of distributed violence capacity, whether it's bioweapons or other things, means that there is no pathway, in my view, of a few surviving and many not. Once we trigger this scale of violence and trauma and dehumanization of ourselves. In the process, we will self-terminate all of us. COVID showed us something. There was no viable New Zealand strategy because New Zealand didn't have paracetamol. New Zealand didn't have antibiotics. So when we talk about this, what are we really saying? And so if we can accept that wealth is foundationally entangled and our futures are foundationally entangled, then there is only one pathway available to us, which is mutually assured thriving. And this invites a degree of greatness from all of us. To recognize the only pathway is mutually assured thriving, because the other pathway is mutually assured destruction, then actually you have to think and be different. And yes, like 2 out of 100 people are going to be arseholes, but 98% aren't. And the joy of flourishing that you're going to get if we take that worldview, I think this is an incredible moment of great opportunity, of great leadership, a great invitation for a generation of people to be extraordinary, to do something absolutely unbelievable. And that, to me, to be clearly people getting this message, for those that hold power, the people that think they're divisible from the world, to recognize the quantum of their entanglement is the biggest challenge. Because I think once you've understood that you're non-divisible, you're foundationally entangled, we all behave differently.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for those powerful sentiments and framing something that's so troublesome and deeply concerning. These are things that I think keep us all up at night, at least those of us that are aware of where capitalism and many of the isms have been moving us for maybe 4 centuries now, probably longer than that. So my second last question, how do you feel about the future of innovation in Canada?
If I'm really honest, I think deep at the heart of Canada is probably the most important contribution Canada can make to the world, which is it can innovate at the heart of a multi-eyed way of seeing the world. My fear is Canada still looks out to California or to the Europe to talk about what does transition look like. And unfortunately, none of those environments have the privilege of history to give what Canada could offer the world as a mass plurination environment, which can create a new reality. And if Canada deeply embraced what that could be, it could challenge theories of life, it could challenge theories of sovereignty, it could build whole new theories of bureaucracy, it could build the first decolonized capital markets, it could build new theories of balance sheet, it could genuinely build the next human revolution. And I would love Canada to focus on what it can contribute to the world and the planet in a way, and it has all the conditions for doing it. If it was to just look from in to out, rather than constantly looking for the innovations that exist in this outside, I think there is something unique. And I think the relationships, whether it was the Great Peace of Montreal, these things that were constructed have laid ground for a great becoming. And I think there is an invitation in Canada to do something extraordinary.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for that. So my final question, what is your ultimate goal and what does success look like and feel like to you and your colleagues? And do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and viewers?
I would love to be part of a community in the Canadian context, building this innovation landscape. That's my call to action. And I think it genuinely has deep hope inside it. It has a new theory of freedom, a freedom to be. Anyone who wants to join that, I'm all in.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Merci, papa, Indy, for your tremendous leadership and consistent brilliance. You have no idea how much I appreciate you sharing with us, building with us, and consistently being able to do the deep introspection and thinking around this. Like a lot of folks are always about that Nike swoosh, just do it. And although you're always doing something, you're one of the busiest people I know, the deep introspection that you utilize to inform your work, your community of practice, is truly inspiring. And I just really appreciate you for that species level planetary thinking, but also that local building and just the way you consistently show up as a human and on all the systems and networks and works that you represent. Like, yeah, you mean a lot to me. You mean a lot to my colleagues. You mean a lot to this planet. So I appreciate you, beloved brother, beloved elder. And as always at Setsi, we close the way we began by acknowledging our creator, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, Indy. I so appreciate you.
It was a real honor. Thank you for holding space and holding the power of the space that you're holding, which I think is so important. And that brings us all together, and to allow for these voices to be, none of these are my voices, they are our voices, and they are in dialogue and in conversation with many people. So let us do something beautiful together.
Ashe, ashe, ashe.